Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So today's message, I wanted to ask you a really important question, and that is, who are you? How do you define yourself, right? Like, who are you really? So hopefully I can give you some things to chew on, to marinate in, to think on, to get the wheels turning, and I just hope that you really enjoy the message today, and I hope you're doing well. So let's go ahead and dive in. So there comes a point in life where you realize that there have always been people trying to define who you are. And, I feel like sometimes we can unconsciously pacify them and just kind of go along with it. And I think that's just a normal part, especially of like adolescence. You got peer pressure and, just wanting to fit in and all these different things. And you're finding yourself anyway during that time, right? Finding yourself, figuring out who you are, what are your standards, your morals, your values, and things like that. But even into adulthood, it's, I don't know if you were like me, but when I was in school, and I enjoyed school for the most part, but towards the end, I was kind of ready to be out in the real world, because I thought, well, at least out there in the real world, there won't be all this, this grade school drama and immaturity kind of stuff going on. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, well, as we know, the harsh reality is it doesn't stop as we go into adulthood, unfortunately. So the challenge becomes being able to identify the subtleties when people in our life really do try and take that position of authority, that position of power, and give themselves the credit for molding you, coercing you, defining you to the the family or the social group, defining your role or whatever it is. It's like you'll start, if you pay attention, you'll be able to identify who's trying to put themselves in that position, right? The one who is allowed that position of power to define who you are. And what's hard is when you are a compassionate person, I think you can unconsciously pacify them and go along with, like, for example, if you're in a scapegoat type situation and maybe you're the person in the family that takes the brunt of all the jokes or something like that, as an example, you might just kind of go along with it like it doesn't bother you, and deep down it does. So it's so subtle, and we have to come to a point even where in our careers there's temptations to feed our ego or fuel our ego and feel good about being able to attach a label or some kind of status to our name and our reputation. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be proud of our hard work and our achievements or anything like that. I'm talking about like identifying with a label or a status so much that's just, it becomes all consuming with regards to how you see yourself and how you define yourself. So it's you get to the point at some point in life, I think most of us do, where there's like this certain level of maturity where you understand that you are so much more than that, because it's kind of like when you hear that saying, God is our rock, our solid rock. He's the foundation that's unshakable, because you might have this great job and therefore this title that goes along with it, and then it's going to crumble. It may crumble, not that for sure it's going to, but there's so many worldly traps where we can identify ourselves as being a part of this or that, and it feels good, but they're not forever. And so a lot of times we have to go through hard and challenging times, even like, for example, when another person tries to view you as an object, to be possessed, or a resource to be used, and that's hard stuff. So there comes a point where you have to kind of, take some time to yourself and think about, who am I really, and how do other people perceive me, so that I can understand where to implement boundaries and what kind of boundaries and with who. You know what I mean? So getting to the point in our path, on our journey, where we are consciously giving thought to who we are, I think that's really important, to make sure we're not taken advantage of, right? So I believe the desire to grow, specifically to continue to grow in life, is endowed by God. That desire, I believe, is God-given. And when someone or something is blocking this process on some level and in some way, that's when we suffer. But I don't know that we are always conscious of this. It's almost like you might just feel this level of unease, but you're not really sure how to pinpoint it. You know what I mean? But it's there. And so, this is the kind of thing that takes time, pulling things from our true current life experience through to the top side of the veil, of consciousness, so that we can truly see it for what it is. It takes time. So as far as other people, if we have a loving and a mutual, reciprocal, cooperative relationship, we're still going to be able to enjoy growth, right? Because growth is a personal experience, but ideally we'd be walking alongside someone who desires to grow too, right? So the trap that suffocates our soul is, this is kind of weird thing to think about, but if you think about it, I'm going to say that again. The trap that suffocates our soul is the very sanctuary that a deceitful person thrives in. Think about it. Labels, associations, possessions, status, and so on. These kind of things can start to feel just very confining, and if you're the kind of person who wants to grow, you're going to outgrow these labels and associations and things like that. But a person who's wearing a mask and living behind a facade of falsehood, this is what constructs that mask, right? These labels and associations and status and all this, right? So if we don't have a partner also wanting to genuinely grow, then trying to force an incompatible relationship is going to be detrimental to everyone, right? Or it should be, because it may only be detrimental to you, who is living honestly, right, by your heart, while the other person really couldn't give two hoots, because again, it's all a facade. They're just acting, and so essentially you're serving in that role as a facade. You're a resource for their confidence, for their the way they want to be seen in the world, right? And much more sometimes. So that's a really tough thing to, number one, become aware of, that people even do that. To number two, be able to, I think the term is assimilate, like in your conscious awareness, come to terms with and accept, because it can be a little bit mind-blowing, really, when you don't operate that way, to come to the realization that there are people who do. So that's tough. That's tough, right? But a lot of times, again, it's those kind of epiphanies that catapult us into our next stage of growth. So in the end, it turns out to be a blessing, So I want to talk about, I mentioned before, I have this awesome art teacher in college. She was my drawing teacher, and she would do paintings too, and a lot of her paintings were of mythological figures, and she had a lot of paintings of these figures holding a large vessel or a big vase, and it would be either carrying water, or it'd be tilted over and the water's pouring out. And then she even painted some actual vases, or they called them vessels, with just kind of like this old school looking mythological story happening all the way around the vessel. And so, but water was a big theme, and specifically water inside these vessels. So it was just a really big theme in these paintings, and so I thought that was really interesting. So if you think about the symbolism of water, and I know that it can be very expansive with regards to what all it can be a metaphor for, but if we just look at the most basic, commonly, I feel like it's a commonly correlated meaning, it would be life, right? Water is life. So when you think about these figures in these mythological scenarios, pouring water out of a vessel, what is that? It's the emptying of self, right? Of the little s self, of the ego. And so you might even think of it like, in the hero's journey, when there's a big mistake made because the gatekeeper role in our psyche, was innocent and therefore naive and ignorant of the schemes of the devil, and so it fell victim, and there was some kind of consequence that started that person, that hero, on their journey. You know what I mean? So that can mean the old self is gone now, the naive self. And I see it kind of like 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. It says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. So it's like the pouring out is emptying and preparing the vessel for more, right? Even though if the vessel is meant to hold something, when it's poured out, it doesn't feel that great. There's that transitional stage, that's tough. But yes, it helps. I feel like it's encouraging and inspiring to understand that there is more to come. That God, again, like he says in the Bible, has plans for us, right? To prosper us and to give us hope and a future. So there's more to come after the emptying out of the little s self, right? So, we're often poured out, like I was saying, after a very trying time, or even like an epiphany where we realize our whole life was a trying time that we normalized. That can happen, right? So I'm going to share with you guys, there's a book that I shared with my my art classes back when I used to teach art at an elementary school, and this was an activity that I incorporated in the last week or two of school one year, and the book is called The Perfect Square, and I'll put a link to it in the description if they've got it on Amazon. But it's a square book. It's very thin. It's hardback. The one I had was hardback, but it's kind of big. It's a kid's book. And it's red. I remember the background is red, and it's called The Perfect Square. And I'm going to share with you by memory what I did, and kind of take you through mentally what I did in that class with the kids. So when the kids would come in, and it was really more effective with the older kids, like again, this is elementary school, so the older kids in elementary would be like between 8 and 11 or so, and so it had a profound effect on them. And so and anyone who's ever been in the teaching field, I'm sure you can attest to this. There's a lot of life lessons that teachers incorporate in the core, what they call the Common Core, or whatever the state standards are that we're required to teach. We always kind of rope that in or loop it into life lessons, and try to just make a positive impact on our students, all around, right? And so I always found it very effective to pique their interest when they would first come into class. And so a lot of times they wouldn't find out the meaning of a lesson until, midway through or so. So that's what I did with this book. I had them come in and I told them I was going to be sharing a book with them, but first we were going to do an activity. So I passed around this origami paper. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it comes in these little small square sheets, and there's all different patterns. It's really beautiful. And so I let all the kids pick out, an origami paper that they loved the pattern of, and they didn't know what it was going to be about, but I told them as soon as everybody had a piece, I told them to destroy it. And they were so confused. So some of them were really excited. And man, they just ripped it up and they threw it on the floor and they stomped on it. I totally let them, because the younger kids, they have to get the energy out, And so some of them just kind of hated to do it. They didn't want to mess it up. It was so beautiful. The patterns and the colors were so beautiful. They didn't want to do it. They just kind of folded it a little bit, or they kind of crumpled it real lightly, And some of them took scissors to it. It was really fun to watch, the creativity in that process, in that destruction process, as well as how some kids, just dove in head first without worrying about anything, and others were hesitant. It was just a really fun experience, for all of us. And so that was how I started this lesson. And then after they were done, I kind of had to, time them out and say that, count down and say, okay, that's it. No more destruction. And then I read the book to them. And I recommend the book. I recommend the book for everybody. It's kind of like watching cartoons now with my daughter. There's some cartoons. I mentioned the one called Bluey before. I think it's from Australia. It's got beautiful, meaningful life lessons that are, just so intelligently and eloquently just woven throughout the stories, throughout the narrative. And a lot of kids' books are that way too. This book is definitely one of them. So what essentially it's about is the story of this paper. This is all by memory, and this has been many years, so forgive me if I'm a little bit off. But essentially what I remember is it's about this paper who that's what happens to it. It's kind of like reading about it personified it. So suddenly the kids are like, oh, I just tore Bob to shreds, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? So but the paper was personified in the book, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of like a story about the life of the paper, and what happened to it. And in the end, the realization was, it was still around, but it was changed, and it was forever changed. And so it certainly brought mindfulness to the classroom. And then they participated in reconstructing it in creative ways, in exciting ways, in new ways, So it was really a beautiful process, and something that I'll never forget. And I had to share that with you all. Okay, so the moral of the story is we'll never be the same after going through hard times that change us, that start us on that path of the hero's journey, that thrust us, below the threshold into the underworld where things get real. You know what I mean? The things like that happen to us in life change us forever, and we'll never be the same. And just like those origami sheets, you may have been torn up, stomped on, metaphorically, hopefully that was all, even though that's horrible, crumpled up, and more. And you may still be in the process of getting taped back together, not knowing what the end result will be, because it takes time. It takes time. And so, having patience with ourselves is really important. I just encourage you to consider this, okay? It's one thing to tape ourselves back together, but if we expect to never be crumbled or torn ever again, did we even learn our lesson? So what if, instead of changing into our crumpled self as an origami paper? What if instead of becoming a delicate origami swan, we became an origami fortune teller? Do you guys remember those from school back in the day? We used to make them. It's where you fold the papers in, and you take just like a sheet of notebook paper, and you put, you know, both thumbs and your first 2 fingers in, and there's like 4 points, and you just do it like this, and you open it, and it's an activity with your friends, and there's numbers written on the inside, and you tell them to pick a number, then you count, and then when they pick, when you stop, there's more numbers. They pick another number, and you flip it up, and there's a fortune underneath that number for them. It's fun, you know. So that's a origami fortune teller, right? So here's the thing: the world will continue to interact with us, and it's not always going to be supportive. You know what I mean? So we're better suited to be prepared and flexible. And better yet is what's stored inside, right? Like the messages in the origami fortune teller, words. But even more so, you know, these are fortunes as kids. It's like if you had something on your mind, you know, like is my friend gonna still be mad at me tomorrow, you know, because I forgot to bring back something that I borrowed? Or, you know, does he really like me, or does she really like me, or whatever it is. As a kid, man, those fortunes, they carried weight, you know what I mean? They were important. so what if we became that origami fortune teller, right? We're flexible, we can move with it, we're not delicate, and there's something important inside, right? So now we, as symbolized by the origami piece, we're not the fortune, we are the paper. The words are the fortune, which brings me to what I want to share with you in closing, which is 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3. And that says, "For as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God." Now, I want to back up. I looked up just to be sure. Epistle here in this context is, it means written letter. So we opened this video by saying, you know, who are we? Who are we really? And who gets to determine who we are? Okay? So this says again, verse 3, "For as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle or the written letter of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tablets of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart." So I hope this encourages you. I hope that it gets the wheels turning for you. I hope that you enjoyed the message today. I thank you for coming along. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.